Simon's butler, but he could get caught in a web of deceit.
You certainly wouldn't want that.
And
success is never going to spoil Simon and Simon.
But when fame splits them up, Simon without Simon become deadly targets.
All I want is my shot.
Then, on Knott's Landing,
Don't push me, laddie.
Sumner and Galveston draw battle lines,
I'd do anything to bring you down.
while Gary confronts Valine.
You knew who I was.
Thursday.
Newhart returns 2 weeks from tonight. Cagney and Lacey will be back on their beat next Monday night at 10, 9 Central and Mountain.
Live from Miami, it's excitement and suspense to Miss Team USA pageant with hosts Lorenzo Lamas and Lisa Hartman. The Solid Gold Dancers and Cool in the Gang, Tuesday.
Saturday. For one moment, the Sterlings were on vacation. The next, they're hurtling through an ancient time gate into a parallel universe.
Today is the very first day of your new lives.
You're gonna love life.
I am?
They find themselves marooned in some other world,
You can get out of this place.
where things aren't what they seem to be. Otherworld premieres Saturday.
This is CBS.
I've heard this before, that it takes a while to really sink in. I honestly feel like this is a dream. I honestly do. It's just like, it isn't happening.
Tragically, it is happening. 64 people, most from the Twin Cities, dead in the crash of a chartered plane in Reno, Nevada. Don Shelby is in Reno. We'll have a direct report in a moment.
We'll also have details on President Reagan's inauguration today, the big farm rally at the state capitol, and tonight's cover story on the illegal gun trade. All of these stories coming up on the 10 p.m. report.
What does it take to excel? It takes speed, reliability, economy. It takes express mail next day service from the post office. We'll deliver your urgent packages overnight. And our 2-pound pack is just $9.35, about half what most others charge. So next time, use the service that delivers over 100,000 packages on time every day. Express mail service. We deliver excellence for less.
Want to liven up those old familiar dinners?
Brush up on your chicken.
Just blend 2 parts Heinz 57 sauce and 1 part honey.
Brush up spare ribs too.
And you've got a sensational glaze for most any kind of meat.
Brush up on your ham.
Make a little extra for dipping.
For a lively taste that's new.
Brush up with Heinz 57 sauce and honey. Takes just a few seconds.
Adds just the right spice.
Brush up.
Today, bring a fresh guy into your kitchen. New Fresh Guy kitchen cloths stay fresh. They don't get sour. You can wipe the stove, clean the fridge, do the dishes, scrub the sink, wipe the wall, and best of all, after every chore, Fresh Guy rinses clean and asks for more.
Fresh Guy has a unique weave that rinses clean. They dry fast and fresh, too, so sour odors won't build up. Try new Fresh Guy disposable kitchen cloths.
After every chore, Fresh Guy rinses clean and asks for more.
WCCO Television, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
This is the plane which took off from Reno, Nevada early this morning. Galaxy Airlines Flight 203. It was bound for the Twin Cities, but never made it. The plane went down moments after takeoff, and at least 64 people died in the fiery crash. The story dominates this special edition of the 10 p.m. report. Good evening, everyone. All the questions remain tonight. What went wrong aboard Flight 203?
While that question remains unanswered, we can tell you that not all the victims on board the plane were from Minnesota. Several, in fact, came from Iowa and Wisconsin. And it will apparently be several more days before all the victims are finally identified. We have a series of live reports via satellite from Reno, Nevada. We begin now with Don Shelby. Don?
Pat, tonight the investigators and rescue squads remain on the scene trying to sort through the charred remains of Galaxy Flight 203. They're still trying to remove some of the victims with the help of the FBI, who arrived tonight, are trying to identify them. This afternoon, the sheriff of Washoe County said a very interesting thing. He said that there may have been a nationally known personality aboard Flight 203, but he would not even confirm whether that name was even on the manifest, whether the person was even aboard the plane. That is just one of several questions that remains unanswered tonight after the Electra 188 crashed just south of the Reno Cannon International Airport. Most of the 72 people, and that number is in dispute, were not well known. They were from Minnesota, some returning for a week of gambling, others returning from a trip to the Super Bowl. And suddenly the pleasant getaway turned to horror when the plane crashed into a lot filled with recreational vehicles. The collision with propane gas tanks aboard those vehicles set off a tremendous explosion that was said to be heard miles away. It left 69 people dead. Just 3 people survived the crash. This morning, the force of the crash and the explosion was clear in the wreckage spread over 5 full acres. A major highway linking Reno and Carson City had to be closed during the morning rush hour. Tonight, the road was only partially reopened, and rescuers removed some of the bodies trapped inside the wreckage since that plane crashed at 3 a.m. Twin Cities time this morning. But dozens of other bodies remain inside the wreckage. So far, the names of the dead have not been released. The names of the injured, however, have been released to the public. All 3 of those people survived the crash. They are from the Twin Cities metropolitan area. Tony Vigneri has been keeping track of the condition of those individuals. And Tony, what have you found?
Don, to look at the wreckage and think that anyone could have survived is really incredible. The 3 men were all thrown from the crash. 2 of the survivors were a St. Paul father and a son who came for a weekend at Lake Tahoe and a trip to the Super Bowl.
It may have been where they sat on the plane. It may have been sheer luck. But tonight, George Lamson and his 17-year-old son, George Jr., are alive. Both were thrown from the wreckage. Both were burned. Tonight, George Sr. remains in critical condition with severe head and chest injuries. His wife, Adrian, rushed from the Twin Cities on word of the crash.
It seemed like there was a look of disbelief in her face that she really wasn't sure what was going on, and not even sure of what to expect, especially as far as the husband was concerned.
Tonight she spent time with her son, whose condition is listed as good. Doctors say his face and hands are bandaged and he hurts, but they say he'll probably be out of the hospital in a couple of days. Doctors say George Jr. and his mother are emotionally unable to talk to reporters. And they add, the younger Lamson says he remembers very little about the crash.
He just says he remembers getting on the plane and buckling in and everything, and the plane taking off, and the plane veering to the right, and then him just basically, he just knew he was going to crash.
The third survivor of the crash, 45-year-old Robert Miggins of Wayzata, reportedly ran from the plane on fire. Rescuers had to roll him in the dirt to douse the flames. He was taken to South Nevada Medical Center in critical condition with burns over 80% of his body.
Two other Twin City residents were also scheduled to board the plane this morning. Doug Avalon and his wife were from Bloomington, changed their minds, and they decided to take a later flight. It was a decision, Don, that probably saved their lives.
All right, Tony. And tomorrow you're going back out to the hospitals to check on their condition. Thank you. The crash took place just about 3 miles south of the Reno Cannon Airport in full view of several people. Some people said, from what they saw, it appeared that one of the wings, the left wing, appeared to be on fire when the plane began to descend. Others said that Electra 188 really never appeared to even get off the ground. Among those surveying the wreckage today was a fellow by the name of Bud Romaker of Garrison, Minnesota. He was out vacationing in Reno last Friday when his daughter, Karen Weaver, and her friend, Don Spector, both of Minneapolis, stopped to pay a visit.
As a surprise, they walked up to our room and rang the doorbell. That's the first we knew they were here.
You had been out here earlier on vacation?
We had been out here a day before, yes.
When did they ring your doorbell?
Friday evening.
But that surprise has turned to horror for Mr. Romaker and his wife, Iona, because both believe now that Karen Weaver, their daughter, and that friend were aboard the plane that crashed. Tonight, Romaker and the friends and relatives and others believed to have friends and relatives aboard that plane now just simply must sit and wait. Officials of the National Transportation Safety Board, the GO team as it is called, say they hope to publish a partial list of those individuals who were killed aboard that plane crash. They will do that, they believe, sometime around 9 tomorrow. In the meantime, the FBI has called in its forensic experts to help identify the remains of those people who died in the crash. We will, of course, keep track of the efforts of the NTSB, of the FBI, of local law enforcement officers, the disaster preparedness agencies, and we'll update you as soon as we can. And if the hand of fate seemed to fall very heavily on Minnesota today, it became even worse this afternoon when we heard that at 5 o'clock, a Golden West tour bus with 39 passengers aboard, most of them from Minneapolis, involved in a fatal bus-car crash in Carson City, 11 miles east of Carson City, which would make it only about 25 miles south of that crash site, involved in a car-bus crash with a Honda. The 2 individuals in the Honda were killed. 18 individuals from Minneapolis were treated and released, some of them still being treated right now at hospitals in Carson City. Those individuals expected to be released very soon. It is not a serious accident, but it just seemed to add salt to the wound for those people from Minnesota who are wondering what is going on out here in Reno. And we're going to try to tell you more as we learn more. And the information is coming to us just in dribs and drabs, but we hope to be able to give you a bit more information, at least on a partial list of the people killed aboard Flight 203. That will be tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and we'll have a special tonight at 10:30.
Don, it may seem academic now and rather trivial. I notice you still have the fatality figure at 69, and we are at 64. Is there any reason for that discrepancy can you think of?
Well, let me tell you what I know of that. According to an attorney for the Galaxy Airlines out of Fort Lauderdale, that attorney says that he believes that there were actually 67 people aboard that aircraft and that 3 survived, making the death toll 64. But according to the Washoe County Sheriff, Vincent Swinney, and according to the disaster preparedness people here and the NTSB, they're sticking with the original figure of 72, which would make the death toll 69. As I said at the beginning, that 72 passenger list is in dispute, but we will not know. It may be months before we actually know the exact number of individuals killed upon that plane crash. But according to the people in Fort Lauderdale, only 67 aboard, 64 killed.
Very good. We'll talk to you a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office says it will not release all of the names of those killed until everyone has been positively identified. But for every additional minute of uncertainty behind every name on that manifest, there is, of course, a family living in anguish and fear about it. Karen Boros has the first of our reports on the victims.
Jim Sullivan was counting the months until his retirement. He was engaged to Mary Ellen Cratchey, who traveled with him to Reno. Life looked good when the two looked ahead. Sullivan had talked about a side trip from Reno to California, which would have taken the pair off the ill-fated plane. This side trip was something for friends to cling to on a day when anything other than the reality of the crash sparked hope. But as the day passed, hope dwindled.
Jim at least would at least called and let his kids know that he was okay if he heard it on the news, that he's out in California. And they said they haven't received any telephone call.
Sam Fergali went to Reno to get married, asking his brother Louis to go along as best man. Today, one family counts 3 dead. Louis Fergali was the father of 5. His wife Annette said he had wanted to stay home, but couldn't very well turn down his brother's request for a best man. It all seems to Annette like a bad dream.
Well, he'll be, I know that door's going to open and Louis is going to just come in with all his suitcases and everything. I just know he's going to.
Karen Boris, WCCO Television News in the Twin Cities.
The Associate Athletic Director at the University of Minnesota, Robert Gary, and his wife Kathleen are victims of the crash. Mr. Gary had been assistant director for 5 years. Today, the players said he deserves the credit for turning the Gopher football team around. Also, they say it's been because of Gary that Gopher athletic events are constant sellouts.
He did, work pretty close with us, and, he's always someone you could, just say hi to in the morning, or you just talk to him about, sports or current events or anything like that. He was, he really tried to, just be one of us. That's what was really great about him.
Prior to becoming assistant athletic director, Bob Gary was the ticket manager for the university athletic department. Pat?
Very few managed to survive this morning's fiery crash. 2 of the 3 passengers who have escaped death are George Lamson and his son of St. Paul. Mrs. Lamson got word this morning that her 41-year-old husband and 17-year-old son had been hospitalized in Reno. She spent her day phoning relatives and trying to find out more about what had happened to them.
And I asked, was he going to live? Is he going to be all right? And he says, well, he's okay right now. And as far as how he's going to be, I mean, we have to wait and see.
Mrs. Lamson said she knew her husband was in surgery with a broken leg and head injuries. George Jr. was the luckiest, though. He suffered burns on his hands and is listed in good condition tonight.
A teacher from Wayzata High School also survived the crash but remains in critical condition. Business education teacher Bob Miggins was burned. Over 90% of his body clings to life in a Reno hospital. Teachers and students at Wayzata prayed for Mr. Miggins to pull through.
He's just one of those people that has a personality that is going to be very, very much missed. And hopefully he'll get through this and be back with us by next school year.
But even as they hoped for the teacher's recovery, all mourned the death of another faculty member. Bill Koski, a guidance counselor at Wayzata High School, was supposed to have been aboard Galaxy Flight 203. He has not been heard from since. For the hundreds of Minnesotans anxious for some kind of word of friends and relatives on that Galaxy flight, there was nothing for them to do, of course, but wait. Many who, tired of the fruitless anxiety at home, waiting for the phone to ring, pushed their way through crowds of travelers at the charter terminal, only to be turned away with no answers. Most were desperate to find out anything, even if it confirmed their worst fears. This man believes his parents were on the plane.
They were on a gambling charter, and everything fits, and I knew they were coming back this morning. And like I said, I haven't heard anything from them, and chances are they would have called if they were not on the flight, because then they would have wanted to let us know they were okay.
And until early this afternoon, charter terminal officials were saying nothing, couldn't really. Even if after they began inviting friends and relatives in, they could only offer their condolences. Pat?
A Bloomington couple who decided at the last minute to skip that fateful flight from Reno did arrive safely in Minneapolis this evening. Doug and Beverly Avalon decided on the bus ride from Caesars Tahoe Resort to spend a few extra hours in Reno before leaving. They appeared weary but thankful that the ordeal was over.
It's just a mixture of sheer terror, of being grateful for having not been on that airplane.
Avalon and his wife made the original flight to Reno, and they said there was no indication that anything might go wrong with the airplane. Several of their friends were aboard that flight when it crashed this morning. The plane has had business and safety problems from its first days in service. Lockheed had a hard time selling the Electra because of the advent of passenger jets. The last Electra came out of the plant in 1961. More than 300 people have died in Electra crashes, including one in 1960 at Tell City, Indiana, a flight that originated in the Twin Cities. Last May, an Electra broke up near Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and just 12 days ago, another crashed while attempting to land during light snow in Kansas City, Kansas. Lockheed points out that 100 Electras remain in service around the world and without serious incident. The airline says the craft remain airworthy if maintained according to FAA standards. We will have a report at 10:30 tonight on problems with the specific plane that crashed today.
A well-known Minnesotan was scheduled originally to have been on that Galaxy Flight 203. Former Viking Bob Lertzma had booked a seat on the flight but decided to cancel last week. He had considered rebooking up until the very last minute, and he knew many people on board that flight.
And if I could say one thing before we started to talking about it, it's not how lucky I am, because I really feel very, very sad for the people that have lost relatives and the people that died in the crash, because about a third of the group I do personally know and have been on different junkets with them, and they're just the neatest people in the world and fun-loving, and I like to send out my prayers to all the relatives and people who do know these the people that did pass away.
We're on our way to a volume goal of 10,000 sales in 1985. Fast start prices on 1,000 front and four-wheel drives at Towsley Ford, Subaru, White Bear Lake.
There's a complex of pests out there waiting to attack your corn crop. And you need protection that's best for conservation tillage. Counter. Systemic insecticide nematicide cuts through the clutter to concentrate protection in furrow for the broadest spectrum control you can get. Seed Safe Counter works on contact and systemically for a strong, healthy stand. Counter, banded or in furrow, best for conservation tillage, guaranteed.
At NSP, we can't help you avoid that winter weather outside, but we can help you keep warm inside. With programs like home energy audits, attic insulation financing, and Budget Helper, with advice on energy savers like insulation and weather stripping. Call NSP for all the facts. We can't do away with Old Man Winter, but we can help you keep him outside where he belongs.
Energy NSP.
While Ronald Reagan was taking the oath of office for his second term as president, there were rumblings on the Minnesota prairie as thousands of farmers converged on the state capitol. They came demanding help in solving their economic crisis and saving the state's family farms. Mike Strand reports.
By midday, the ranks of farm supporters numbered more than 7,000. Teachers, students, iron and auto workers joined in the rally of solidarity to save rural America.
We must have an uprising the likes of which we have not seen. We must have a major change. This is only the beginning.
We want dignity on the farms. We don't want it tomorrow. We want it today.
Exactly what farmers want is threefold: a moratorium on foreclosures, guaranteed operating loans, and better crop prices. State lawmakers agreed to assist, but put the blame squarely on congressional cuts in farm programs.
Not only is that unfair, but when you compare it with their spending on defense, it's a moral outrage.
But as protesters weathered the biting cold outside, lawmakers inside continued to search for a workable rescue plan. House DFLers unveiled a three-point plan for lower property and sales taxes for farmers, and they accused majority Republicans of foot-dragging the issue. Republicans, meantime, conducted a special hearing at the St. Paul Armory in which they decided not to dive too quickly into any farm bailout plan.
We are not going deliberately slow. We're just going deliberately to make sure that we do not pass up a better alternative than any one that we might quickly pull out of there as a quick response to this political movement.
Farm protesters called for quick action, but any bipartisan legislative package is likely to require weeks, if not months, to enact. Mike Strand, WCCO Television News, St. Paul.
The farmers and their problems were conspicuously absent from President Reagan's inaugural address today. But despite a low blow from the weatherman, the address was generally warmly received, and now all of elite Washington is dancing the social ceremony away. Skip Lucia reports live from our D.C. bureau. Skip?
David, it is bitterly cold here again tonight, but no matter what the wind chill, Washington is a city of celebrations. On Pennsylvania Avenue, no one was strolling, but the cabs and limousines were rolling, carrying Minnesota revelers to an inaugural ball. But earlier today, the outside events canceled by the cold, the Minnesotans congregated on Capitol Hill. They watched the television set to see Ronald Reagan, surrounded almost solely by other politicians, raise his right hand and promise to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution for another 4 years. And he asked the Congress for another pledge.
Let us make it unconstitutional for the federal government to spend more than the federal government takes in.
Later, the president also spoke to hundreds of disappointed high school band members, including those from Princeton, Minnesota. They were frozen out of playing for the president, but at least they did get a chance to see him. And tonight, Washington is all glitter. The dress code, black tie, furs, and formals as the Republicans top off their celebration. Our Jim Gately has just returned from the inaugural ball where the Minnesotans have gathered. Jim, what kind of a time did they have?
Skip, if you were lucky enough to get an invitation, you paid $125 per ticket. Now, for that price, you got to see the president and Mrs. Reagan. They were there for 5 minutes. The pre-Reagan entertainment was as red, white, and blue as you can get, right under the original Wright Brothers airplane at the Air and Space Museum. Then it was start time. The president said he had a feeling everything was beginning to turn out right. And the first dance was, appropriately, to the song Nancy. Minnesotans in attendance said it made them proud.
Very definitely. I could not listen to his address and watch the swearing in today without having a great feel of pride. This is our country, and the theme was We the People.
This is not your everyday party. For many people, it was the best ever. How would you rate this ball?
Oh, this is without question number one. Just the excitement and the glamour and the wonderful people that are here.
A little different than Stillwater?
We're living in Stillwater. Yeah, it's even better. But Stillwater's very nice.
They have good parties in Stillwater, too, but when they talk about Washington being a glamorous city, it's a night like tonight that they're talking about. I mean, look at the bureau here.
Yeah, not bad. I mean, for two old men, we don't look half bad, do we, David?
Speak for yourself.
Oh, you guys look wonderful. I think that we should do this once a week.
I do, too.
I'll get
once a week?
Yeah, we'll all look like penguins then, and we can throw crackers to it. No, you look wonderful. I just did a take on you. I think that's marvelous.
Very handsome, both of you.
Is that an orange tie? Where'd you...
Red.
Oh, red, all right.
You can still hear him laughing in the background. Well, Mr. Fairborn...
They got our weather anyway.
Yes, you'd have to wear a tuxedo with a down jacket over it, though.
We've done a 180 from this weekend here in the Twin Cities. Our temperature today was up into the 20s, and we're still above zero. We've been above zero now for about 24 hours, believe it or not. 24 was our high, 8 was the low. No precipitation here in the Twin Cities. But it isn't just Washington that's staggering underneath the cold weather, because that cold weather has slid all the way down into the southeast. Record low temperatures, almost 100 of them for the day. Coldest ever recorded in about 20 cities down throughout the southeast. And tonight, there's still some very, very cold air down there. Now, the high temperatures today did not recover very much down in this part of the country, although it did some, but only 30s, 40s, and 50s down into Florida. Temperatures did not get above zero in parts of West Virginia and Pennsylvania today, while we basked in the 20s and the teens. Right now, across the country, these are actual readings. It's 13 degrees at Atlanta, Georgia, and temperatures in the teens, only 21 degrees in Jacksonville, Florida right now. So the real cold air is going to be centered down over the southeast throughout the night tonight. If they can just get through tonight, we'll begin to see some recovering down there, but it's going to really damage that citrus crop and the vegetable crops down in Florida. By tomorrow, high pressure is going to push the snow that's lingering around the Great Lakes off the east coast. We're going to have high pressure and sunshine over us. Another storm system developing in the southwest may bring some snow into the central plains, but it's like it's going to stay to the south of us. We're just going to have sunshine and moderate temperatures, 20 degrees for high temperatures, struggling into the 40s and the 50s down in the southeast tomorrow, but still some temperatures all the way down to the Gulf Coast, only in the 30s for highs. The southwest is going to see temperatures in the 50s and the 60s. They're even going to get a taste of some of the cooler air. Right now, some light flurries in the Twin Cities. We have a temperature of 19 degrees. Northwest winds 18, gusting to 24. Still a wind chill of 11 degrees below zero. But our forecast is for continued improvement. Variable clouds, windy tonight, winds out of the northwest at 10 to 25, a low of around 8 degrees. Tomorrow we'll be looking at sunny, winds northwest 10 to 20, but a high of 25 degrees. Tomorrow night, mostly clear with a low of 9, so staying above zero. And then Wednesday it'll be partly cloudy with a high again of around 25 degrees. Our extended forecast calls for partly cloudy conditions on through part of the weekend. No significant precipitation in sight. And for Saturday's parade over in St. Paul, 22 degrees for a high temperature under partly cloudy skies. That won't seem bad at all compared to years past.
Well, I was sorry about Washington having such cold weather, but I'm kind of glad we didn't have it today. Thank you, Mike. Dave?
Today in the little town of Goddard, 15 miles west of Wichita, Kansas, a 14-year-old boy with a high-powered rifle opened fire on the junior high school principal, killing him, seriously wounding 2 adults and a student. The boy subsequently surrendered. The federal investigators looking into the $1 million fire in Little Falls of a week ago today say their preliminary findings suggest there was no arson involved, that the fire was accidental. Investors apparently have given President Reagan a vote of confidence. A big surge on the market today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed up over 34 points.
The North Stars are in Chicago tonight, facing their arch rival, the Blackhawks. Mark Rosen with the highlights in just a moment.
This is Spot. He kept having accidents in the house, so I recommended 2 fabulous books. My book and this book. You see, the curing of Spot was simple, but for the damage he'd already done, I turned to the Yellow Pages and found a great carpet cleaning firm who didn't even growl about coming on Sunday. So next time you've got a problem, do what I do. Turn to the Yellow Pages, your second best friend.
The Northwestern Bell Yellow Pages, published by U.S. West Direct.
I am a black businessman running a black business, and I ought to be hiring black people to manage my black stores.
Monday night at 10:30 on WCCO television.
Could your business withstand the unexpected? It could with American Family Business Insurance. American Family will specially design a plan to protect your property, income, and liability. American Family Business Insurance. We'll keep your books looking good.
American Family Insurance.
Call an American Family agent today. See the white or yellow pages.
It's coming to farmlands across America. Improved weed control and crop residue. New Lasso Microtech herbicide.
Same grade Lasso, now only better.
Billions of micro-encapsulated droplets of Lasso move through crop residue more easily for improved performance in conservation tillage. When crop residue gets in your way, break through with new Lasso Microtech, the yield protector.
Well, it's axiomatic, of course. You can't buy a whole new team or trade for a team, and you can't buy a front office so you fire the coach, and Herb Brooks was victimized by that truism today.
Out the door, the team's not going well in New York. Some of the writers, I'm sure, in New York are very happy to see Herbie go. They've been on his back ever since he stepped into town. He was once called a genius, but now Herb Brooks is jobless. The man behind the 1980 Lake Placid Miracle Gold Medal Olympic team was fired by the New York Rangers. The former St. Paul Johnson standout and Gophers hockey coach was released by Craig Patrick, the Rangers general manager. Brooks, of course, made Patrick known throughout the hockey world by making him his Olympic team assistant coach. Ironically, Patrick will lead the Rangers for the duration of this season. In his 3.5 years in the Big Apple, Brooks earned a 131, 113, and 41 mark, plus respectability for himself and the team. However, this season, Brooks' team has been hit harder by injuries than any other in the National Hockey League. However, Patrick still said the Rangers needed a change. As for the possibility of Brooks coming back home to coach the North Stars, Lou Nanne said he'd be happy to have Brooks, but as long as Glenn Sonmore enjoys his job, Sonmore will stay. Stay tuned, folks. This story isn't over yet. Herb Brooks may be here faster than you think, because tonight in Chicago, the North Stars were blasted again by the Blackhawks 7-2. The Stars held 2 team meetings before tonight's game. They didn't work. Ed Olczyk picked up a loose puck and beat Milosh with a power play shot, 2-0 early in the game. The Stars were able to light up the scoreboard in a power play of their own. Steve Payne got one past Murray Bannerman. Well, that made the score 3-1 after one period. Payne scored again in the third. However, the momentum did not carry past the period break. The Blackhawks scored 3 more times in the second period. Milosh made a great save, only to be victimized by Dennis Savard's rebound. The Stars are 10 points out of first place, with Pittsburgh coming to town on Wednesday. Well, some post-Super Bowl thoughts. Yes, the 49ers were awesome yesterday, but wouldn't it be fun to see a Super Bowl game go down to the wire for once? The more this game is hyped, the more lopsided the score becomes. You know, it's always fun trying to get an interview with the winning quarterback. Now, tell me the guy in the back row can actually hear one word Joe Montana is saying here. Artist Leroy Neiman had his pen and pad, but not to take quotes, but to sketch all-pro tackle Keith Fahnhorst, who had a double reason to smile.
I'll tell you, it's been a hell of a weekend. I had a little girl was born yesterday, 10 o'clock. My face is so sore from grinning. I don't know if I can take much more, but I'll have to grin a little more.
Glad the season's over on a great note, though.
Oh yeah, it was more than anybody had ever expected. It was fantastic.
Keith Fahnhorst at the University of Minnesota, and Jerry Burns will be back to run the Vikings offense under Bud Grant next year.
All right, thank you, Mark. Because of the heavy press of news, events, and time, part 2 of Dave Nimmer's cover story series on guns will be broadcast on this 10 p.m. report tomorrow night. That wraps up the one for tonight, but we're going to be back in just a matter of seconds with a special half-hour report on the air disaster in Reno.
The live reports from our 4 news teams at the crash site will bring the facts up to date, so please stay with us right after these messages.
My dandruff shampoo is good.
Maybe you should try something else. My dandruff shampoo really works.
Maybe you should try something else, like Selsun Blue. Doctors and pharmacists recommend Selsun Blue more than all other leading brands combined. It's #1. What that means to you is no leading brand gets rid of dandruff better than Selsun Blue. Ask your doctor or pharmacist, or try it yourself. That's all the proof you'll need. Selsun Blue. It's #1.
Out of sugar.
Would you be a dear and get a cup from the neighbors?
Certainly, love. Could I borrow a cup of crystal sugar?
Always insist on pure, reliable crystal sugar. It's worth going out of your way for.
Did you get the sugar?
Do we have any other neighbors, dear?
He doesn't know it, but I'm giving my father a great gift. For a limited time at Dueling Optical, when I purchase a pair of eyeglasses, and there's hundreds to choose from, my father or I can receive a pair of fine quality, regular soft contact lenses, or prescription sunglasses absolutely free.
At Dueling Optical, receive a free pair of regular soft contact lenses or prescription sunglasses with eyeglass purchase.
Dueling Optical, for the best optical value in sight.
WCCO Television, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
The Jeffersons will not be seen tonight in order that we might bring you the following WCCO-TV news special report on this morning's air disaster in Reno, Nevada. The Jeffersons will return tomorrow night at this time.
A Super Bowl celebration turned tragic early this morning when a chartered aircraft bound for the Twin Cities crashed shortly after takeoff. What remained in the rubble near Reno is a mystery, and the light of day provided few answers. Why did it crash? Who perished? How did the survivors escape? One fact is known. The death of Flight 203 is the worst air disaster in Minnesota history. Good evening again, everyone. Tonight, we are going to search for answers. Ellen Cox will offer a disturbing report about the safety problems of the downed airliner. Barb Brown has the story of the 3 Minnesotans who survived. From the Twin Cities Charter Terminal, Colleen Needles with the story of those trying to learn the fate of their loved ones. The crash claimed the life of one of the Twin Cities' leading citizens. Mark Watts and Mark Rosen will tell us about Robert Geary from the University of Minnesota. Dave Nimmer will examine the charter business in this metropolitan area. And finally, Jim Newman with the story of a Twin Cities man who gave up his seat on that flight at the last minute. Pat?
With an estimate that ranges from 64 to 69 fatalities, most of them Minnesotans, the crash of Flight 203 is not only Minnesota's worst air disaster in history, but it is also this nation's worst plane crash in 2.5 years. Anchorman Don Shelby and 7 WCCO staffers have been at the crash site since this afternoon. Don is with us this evening live via satellite with the latest developments on that crash. Don?
It is 20 hours since the charter aircraft went down, but we continue to learn new information just second by second here. Investigators for the National Transportation Safety Board want to know why the plane crashed. They want to even know why some of those individuals survived the crash, and they certainly want to know what happened to the black box aboard the aircraft, if indeed there was a black box aboard the aircraft. Tonight, the search for that answer has combined with the removal of the bodies of 69 people who died in the crash. A slow procession of body bags told the story as crews continued to clean up the crash. And the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board arrived on the scene, along with 10 investigators. Jim Burnett would not comment on reports that one of the wings appeared to be on fire before the crash, but cited evidence that indicated the fire began after the crash. In addition to the 10 investigators already there, the NTSB expects to send 3 more investigators to the scene later this week. This afternoon, the sheriff of Washoe County, Vince Steary, said that someone that he said was a national celebrity, a personality that everyone would recognize, was possibly aboard that aircraft when it crashed, but he said he could not confirm it. He said that the manifest did not contain the name of that individual, but it was his information that a well-known personality, a national personality, was aboard the plane when it crashed, but he said he could not confirm it, and it is still one of the answers we are seeking at this hour. In addition, tonight, the NTSB spokesperson told me in the lobby of the hotel where they are staying and holding a meeting right now that they may have some information tomorrow tomorrow at 9 o'clock. He said they are getting bits and pieces of information. Some significant information has already been gathered from the crash scene, but what they think they may be able to bring up tomorrow is at least a partial list of the individuals who have been identified. The search is also on tonight for the black box aboard Flight 203, the cockpit recording device that might reveal the final minutes of the Galaxy Flight 203. We do know something already about that. We do know that the pilot of 203 called back shortly after takeoff to the command tower and said, "I'm feeling vibrations along my wing," and then it appeared that he was trying to turn his aircraft back toward the airport when it crashed. In the meantime, much of what is known about the crash comes from witnesses at the scene because it was in the downtown area or just south of Reno in the downtown area. Debbie Ely spent the day talking to many of the witnesses, some who actually saw the plane crash. Debbie?
Don, even though the accident happened early in the morning, it's amazing just how many people saw it. Perhaps that's because it happened near a busy thoroughfare, Highway 395, the road between Reno and Carson City. Witnesses today swapped horrifying details of the plane crash, where they were, what they saw and heard when the Lockheed Electra slammed into a recreational vehicle lot in the wee hours of the morning. Debbie Ford lives in an apartment complex close by. Shortly before 1 a.m., she and her husband heard a plane flying dangerously low, vibrating their apartment.
And then we heard a very loud noise, and right away we knew what it was. And we jumped up and went to our balcony, and we could see these huge flames in this field over here, leaping, oh gosh, someone said 40 feet. I think it was much higher than that.
A passing motorist, Mark Brenner, and a friend were among the first people on the scene.
There wasn't anything that I could see, just the flames. When I went over and got the guy that was in the field, there were a couple people still in their seats. But there was.
How were people wounded? Describe that.
It was the guy. He had a cut on his head, and that was all. And then the other guy that was on fire, he was almost completely on fire.
All his clothes were just, there was nothing left. There's parts hanging from his face and stuff, and he kept screaming, "Help me, help me." And then a lady came out and put a blanket around him, and we took him off away from the thing. Luckily, because if we had left him there, would have been right there when there was that second explosion.
Throughout the day today, firefighters remained on the scene, pouring water on a charred heap of metal. Pieces of the plane were scattered along the main thoroughfare, the landing gear, and a wheel here and there. Barriers were set up to keep the curious out, a source of frustration for this man, Bud Romaker of Garrison, Minnesota. He fears that his daughter Karen was on that plane.
We called back to Minneapolis. My boy is chief of police in Mount View, and he is doing everything that he can there with the Ramsey County Sheriff's Department, Hennepin County Sheriff's Department. They're trying everything, and we spoke to him about an hour and a half ago, and he said that they were already getting dental records from St. Cloud from my daughter, and they were going to get them out here just as soon as possible if it was necessary that they had to use those records.
We don't think Bud was ever able to find out if his daughter, Karen Weaver, was indeed on that plane. After fruitless attempts to get the airplane's manifest list, that's the list of the passengers, and several pleas to be able to check the rubble for any sign of her, he gave up and left the scene. We still don't know, as you mentioned, Don, when that passenger list will be available.
You know, in talking to Bud Romaker and his wife, Iona, who was not taking it very well, according to Bud, who was sitting in the truck there at the crash scene, his frustration at not being able to simply go to the scene and look at the spot where he thinks that his daughter lost her life. No one seemed to listen to him. The authorities paid no attention to his concern.
Well, he even come to the media and asked the media if we could help him.
Yes, he said, "Please, can you get me to the crash scene?" We tried, and they denied us that appeal. All right, Debbie, thank you very much. This evening, officials of Galaxy Airlines released the names of the flight crew. I'd like to read those to you. They were Alan Heasley, Kevin Fieldsa, Mark Friels. They are all of Florida. The flight attendants were Heather Costin and Donna Cotillo. Their hometowns were not released, but we do know that the entire flight crew was from the state of Florida. We also have some sidebar reporting to do here. While we were in the newsroom here at KTVN Channel 2 in Reno, where we have been given a great deal of assistance in putting these programs together, we found information that a charter bus, a Golden West charter bus tour, was involved in a crash south of Reno, down in Carson, about 11 miles east of Carson. And ironically, that 39 of the passengers aboard that Golden West bus were from the Minneapolis area. Many were injured in that crash. 2 people were killed, but those were the individuals in the Honda Accord that ran into the tour bus. 18 of the individuals aboard from Minneapolis aboard that bus were treated and released from the Carson Tahoe Medical Center down there, and they seem to be doing well. But it seems that fate has dealt a double blow here. Final report on what happened here is not expected from the National Transportation Safety Board for about 6 months. In the meantime, investigators have some conflicting stories from witnesses and mounds of charred evidence to begin sifting through before all of the answers are known. Pat.
Don, I've been wondering today with this manifest list and the discrepancy in the numbers and the fact that some people may not have been listed on the manifest, is that an irregular procedure for the airline not to have a complete list of passengers if in fact there was a national celebrity that was not listed? Is that a regular procedure that they would do?
Well, this, I think, is the second major airline disaster that I have covered, and it seems, not only from those I've covered, but from those I have witnessed from a distance from other newsrooms, that it is not unusual to have discrepancies like that from what appears from the wreckage, from the crash site, from the disaster preparedness officials who are working only with bits and pieces of information, plus the manifest, plus eyewitness testimony of who got on, who got off, who decided at the last minute to not take the trip home, who decided to get on at the last minute. That's what they are working with. What the individuals at Galaxy are working with is a manifest that had been prepared prior to departure, and they say that there were 67 people aboard, 64 killed. Here, working with all of the rest of the information, the individuals who might have been aboard that aircraft, on the outside, they are using the inflated figure, and they admit, the officials here admit, it may be high, that there may have been as many as 72 aboard, which would mean that 69 people lost their lives. But again, that will not be known, and the complete information will not be clear for several months at least, Pat. But it is not unusual in cases like this to have a mix-up.
All right. Thank you very much, Don, and thanks to Tony and Debbie as well.
You bet.
Well, as we look back through the years, there have been several major plane crashes involving Minnesotans. In March 1950, for example, a plane crash in Minneapolis killed 15 people. On June 9th, 1956, 6 people were killed when a Navy plane crashed in a Minneapolis neighborhood. And again on March 17th in 1960, a Northwest flight from Minneapolis to Florida crashed near Tell City, Indiana, killing all 63 people on board. That crash involved the same type of aircraft that crashed today in Reno. And Alan Cox has spent much of this day looking into the safety record of Lockheed Electras. Alan?
Pat, of the 61 Electras still registered to fly in the United States, the one that went down today may have been the most publicized. On a stormy night in Dallas, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, normally uneasy about flying, forced to do it in his presidential campaign, Jackson steps off the Galaxy airliner and pretends to kiss the ground. Jackson and his group had been buffeted in violent winds as the plane crossed the south, rising and falling hundreds of feet in a matter of seconds.
Some people saw fluid, I saw it too, smelled it, a fluid coming out of the plane onto the runway. Reverend Jackson never flew in it again, and I'm surprised that anybody else did.
The FAA says later the plane checked out okay. The rough ride, a normal effect of piloting through southern storms. A few days before, one of the 4 turboprop engines had to be shut down in flight. Earlier in the primary season, the same airliner comes close to a control tower in Iowa. Those were the publicly reported incidents for the Galaxy airliner, designated N5532. Private safety investigators say there were more. In December 1983, a landing gear problem. It took 3 tries after takeoff to raise the gear. In April 1984, an engine shut down in flight because of an oil problem. Both problems were quickly repaired by the airline. The reports come from the Aviation Safety Institute, the creation of investigator John Gallipo. He's a frequent witness before congressional committees, often attacked as premature or wrong by airlines and aircraft makers. Using FAA reports, Gallipo's group counts 34 engine shutdowns on Lockheed Electras in this country in the last 15 months, 89 cracks in the plane's exterior panels, 5 cracks in the Electra's wings. Gallipo also quotes a source in Reno as saying 2 propeller blades were found some distance from today's crash site, raising the possibility that the propellers contributed to the plane's problem. Even John Gallipo, though, admits that Galaxy Airlines appears to have a clean safety record. The plane that went down was 1/3 of Galaxy's fleet. 2 other Electras are used by the airline for freight. Galaxy was opened for business by the FAA in August 1983, one of several new air carriers created after the airlines in the United States were deregulated. Today's disaster is likely to rekindle the debate over procedures of the airlines, although government officials, Pat, continue to contend that safety in the United States Airways has never been deregulated.
All right. Thank you, Alan. In just a moment, our special report will resume with Don Shelby, who has the latest on injuries in Reno, and we'll also hear the story of a few of the lucky survivors of the tragedy, as told by their thankful relatives.
Stolen guns are good as gold and easy to get rid of. In fact, they've become one of Minnesota's better exports. With more than 16,000 gun dealers and countless sportsmen and collectors, guns in Minnesota are an easy mark. They're stolen during break-ins, then unloaded all across the country. Has Minnesota become a supply source for criminals? The cover story on Minnesota's illegal gun trade this week on the 10 p.m. report.
The three survivors are all from the Twin Cities. Tonight, 45-year-old Robert Miggins of Wayzata is listed in critical condition. He was taken to the South Nevada Medical Center with burns over 80% of his body. 41-year-old George Lamson Sr. of St. Paul is also listed in critical condition tonight. His condition has been upgraded somewhat. Lamson suffered severe head and chest injuries with burns over 15% of his body. But his son, 17-year-old George Lamson Jr., is at a local hospital. He is in good condition with facial and hand burns tonight. Tonight, Adrienne Lamson, the mother, the wife, flew in from the Twin Cities to be with her husband and son.
With her son, and she's very distraught about what's going on now. It's now that she's here and she is seeing the physical effects of the plane crash and what's happened to her son, and soon to see what's happened to her husband. She's very concerned and is just emotionally drained right now.
George Lamson and his son, George Lamson Jr., were here in Reno for a weekend at Lake Tahoe and for some time at the Super Bowl. Pat.
Thank you, Don. That hospital in Reno is an emotional world away from the quiet kitchen in St. Paul where the Lamsons learned about the crash. Barb Brown was there.
In St. Paul this morning, Adrienne Lamson and her daughter Doris reacted with shock, relief, and some fear. They knew George Lamson Sr. was in surgery, had a broken leg and a head injury. Beyond that, it was wait and see. 17-year-old George Jr., though, was well enough to phone from his Reno hospital room.
He was really shook up, and he was really worried, and he was just, I don't know, I can't explain it. He was just so happy that he was alive.
He said they were up in the air, and then they were down. And he told me where he was sitting, and at a window seat. And I asked him, did you have your seatbelt fastened? He says, yes. But he said his seat just went out, just blew out or something.
Adrienne Lamson is a registered nurse and was working when she heard what happened. I've
consoled many families where things have happened, and it's easy to do that, to talk to them when you're outside, but when you're the one inside, it's a lot different.
At Wayzata High School today, the mood was more subdued than usual as students and faculty worried about two of their own. They'd heard that business education teacher Bob Miggins survived the crash but suffered severe burns. They knew guidance counselor Bill Koski was supposed to have been aboard. Chuck Mann has been their colleague and friend for nearly 20 years.
I've just become numb. I mean, my feelings are such that it's just difficult for me to feel real right now. And I hope that by tomorrow I'll be somewhat back to normal.
Barb Brown, WCCO Television News.
It is hard to imagine having to face the frustration of waiting that your worst fears would remain unconfirmed for hours and hours, perhaps days. Colleen Needles has that report.
At its busiest hour, the International Charter Terminal looked no different than it does on any other day. Hundreds of expectant travelers stood in line waiting to board planes for Hawaii or Mexico. It was only when the crowds thinned that the anguish and uncertainty of dozens of other people waiting on the fringe became evident.
Most of the people have died on that plane. Let's face up to it. Let's get the list so we can go on with living here and take care of this. I've got two widows and a mother I'm trying to take care of right now. We have sons and daughters and families here that have been killed. Let's get somebody from the airlines or FAA helping these people.
And that has been the whole story here today. Anxious friends and relatives, tired of waiting at home with no word, came here only to wait some more.
Nothing. Not a thing. The only thing we know is what we found out on the radio, and that's about it.
Most who gathered at the airport today were desperate to find out anything, even if it confirmed their worst fears. But the troubled friends and relatives received little help. For a time, charter terminal officials turned people away.
Are there any friends or relatives of passengers on the Galaxy flight?
Even after officials began rounding up friends and relatives, they could offer only condolences.
Didn't really tell us much of anything, that they didn't have a manifest, passenger manifest, and gave me a phone number to call to try to get one, and I called that number and was unable to get anything confirmed.
In the end, only the snow-covered, untouched cars in the parking lot offered any clue that many passengers had never returned to claim them. Colleen Needles, WCCO Television News, Minneapolis.
The associate athletic director at the University of Minnesota, Bob Geary, died in the plane crash. Mr. Geary had been at the right hand of Paul Giel, the athletic director, for 5 years. Geary's wife, Kathleen, also on the plane. And as Mark Watts reports, Bob Geary's loss to the athletic department has been felt immediately.
One co-worker told us, "You always knew that Bob Geary was doing all the extra work, but he never received the credit he deserved." He said, "Without Geary, many of these trophies and plaques wouldn't be here." Perhaps, he added, it's the athletes who will miss him the most.
Well, I think I'll remember him as a man that, really cared about the players, and he really got things done for us.
Geary was the athletic ticket manager for 11 years. In 1979, he was named assistant athletic director by the head of the department, Paul Giel. He walked down Bierman Hallway every day to sit in his office next to Giel's, a seat that everyone said he had earned. Many of Geary's co-workers said that he was the hardest worker in the entire department, that he was a cohesive glue that pulled everything together, and that his loss will never be forgotten.
I think for one thing, he's kept it on an even keel through hard times and good times, and he's been the backbone of the financial picture and everything like that.
And his neighbor echoed the same sentiments. And he remembered one thing about him the most.
His personality. I'm like that too. I like to be congenial to everybody and talk and not be nasty to anybody, and that's the way he was. He never said a bad thing to him about nobody.
Today, Geary's paper wasn't picked up, and Harvey Irvin figured that his house was empty, but said Geary has left him filled with wonderful memories. Mark Watts, WCCO Television News, Minneapolis.
Our sports director, Mark Rosen, worked with Bob Geary for the past 8 years. He has some reflections on the man. Mark?
Well, Dave, the one comment I receive from people more than any other about my job is, wow, you get to see all those games. Yes, I get to see all those games, but that's just what they are, games. There's always another one tomorrow night. The most rewarding part of my job is the people I meet and work with, people like Bob Geary of the University of Minnesota. For many of you, this may be the first time you've heard Bob Geary's name mentioned. That's just the way Bob liked it. The limelight was for the others, the coaching staff, the athletes, and yes, the athletic director. Bob Geary was Paul Giel's first appointee in 1972. As in so many businesses, the man second in command runs the show. The U of M men's athletic department is no exception. When Giel was away making public relations speeches and attending fundraising events, the necessary evils of his job, Geary was steadily keeping the department afloat. Bob was the business manager, in essence the numbers man, and he knew his trade well. No one recognized this more than Giel, who said today that Bob Geary will be nearly impossible to replace. Gophers basketball coach Jim Dutcher goes back many years with Geary. Jim said tonight that Bob was a very upfront man. There was never any doubt where he was coming from and where you stood with him. Dutcher went on to say that we had a great working relationship. Bob liked the sport I coach, but more importantly, Bob was a good friend. Our families had a very special relationship. Yes, Bob Geary was the genuine article. His co-workers, acquaintances, friends, and of course his family will deeply miss Bob and Kathleen. Those who have supported Gopher Athletics over the years owe a great deal to Bob Geary. Maybe next time you attend a sporting event at the U, think about Bob before the game starts. I know I will.
Dave. Thank you, Mark. In a moment, Dave Nimmer to offer a perspective on the popularity of air charter travel. And there will be 2 stories of people who, through a twist of fate, decided not to take Flight 203.
Wheel of Fortune, a show the whole family can enjoy, with puzzles to be solved by the young and young at heart, and prizes to be won by all.
The power belongs to you guys.
So get your family involved. See who can solve the puzzles first at your house. Wheel of Fortune with Pat Sajak and Vanna White.
The Wheel spins weeknights at 6:30 on WCCO Television, Channel 4.
Minnesotans are no strangers to charter flying, and as Dave Nimmer discovered, the Twin Cities, in fact, are one of the country's more lucrative charter markets.
Well, Pat, charters are designed to be less expensive than ordinary travel. A travel wholesaler leases a plane and then goes out to book the passengers, offering them cut rates. And in the wintertime, there are plenty of customers in Minnesota. During the season from December to April, an estimated 15,000 Minnesotans a week take charter vacations. The outfit that does the lion's share of the charter business here in the Twin Cities is MLT Vacations, headquartered here in Minnetonka. MLT had nothing to do with the charter or the plane that went down. But during the season, they book on the average of 43 charter flights a week, anywhere from Reno to Mexico. MLT agents are busy enough that the company has its own 727 jet and leases 2 more 727s.
It's a good charter market because everyone wants to leave here in the wintertime. And there's just not enough schedule service to all these destinations to handle that kind of volume, so charter is the answer.
Walker maintains that charter flying is as safe as commercial, that past records prove it.
The airplanes that we use, our own airplanes, the airplanes that we charter from Transamerica, from PSA, have the same maintenance requirements that you would have on American Airlines or United Airlines or Northwest Republic, any of the carriers. It's an FAA maintenance requirement. We have our major maintenance program with Republic Airlines here.
In fact, MLT used to lease jets from Republic and Northwest. But these days, business justifies the company's own plane. A business unlikely to be affected much by the tragedy in Reno. Pat, one of the key questions is, are charters safe? And MLT spokesmen say absolutely. And one has the feeling with the big outfits, at least, the size of MLT, that's probably the case. MLT 727 is one of the later model jets. It's maintained by Republic Airlines, and it's 2 other jets that it calls into play when customers warrant are leased from Dan Air, so it's big enough to be reliable.
Since the Twin Cities, Dave, is such a big area for charter flights, are these companies worried now following the crash today that perhaps their business is going to be cut into and people are going to be afraid to take a charter because they think maybe the planes aren't maintained the same?
They don't expect that the crash in Reno is going to have any more of an impact than it will on commercial airlines. Charter is a big business here because everybody wants to get out of Minnesota in the wintertime. And although there may be a few cancellations, they don't expect to see a big dent in the marketplace.
All right. Thank you, Dave. A last-minute change in plans probably saved the lives of a Bloomington couple scheduled to return on that Reno flight. Doug and Beverly Avalon were only minutes from boarding the fateful flight, but decided to spend an extra night in Reno instead. They arrived safely in Minneapolis tonight with mixed feelings, though, about their good fortune.
And I cannot describe the feeling that my wife and I have. It's just a mixture of sheer terror, of being grateful for having not been on that airplane.
The Avalon said the original flight to Reno was uneventful. Several of their friends and acquaintances were aboard the return flight when it crashed today.
That's what Shelby meant by fate. You find yourself shaking your head at such stories. Jim Newman now offers us another case in point.
Willard Morton tossed the idea around for a week. First, he thought he would take the charter. When a woman friend, his traveling companion, got sick, he reconsidered, then decided to go anyway. Then he changed his mind a couple more times as the departure drew near. It seemed an inconsequential decision at the time. It does not seem inconsequential to Willard Morton now.
I feel tremendous gratitude that my life has been spared, but I feel an awful lot of grief for the people that lost somebody that they love.
Morton remembers the morning of the departure. He had decided not to go, but he vacillated a final time. Morton said he decided to go, to take the charter, and then he dozed off. At 7:30 this morning, a friend called and told Willard Morton the plane went down.
I got out of bed and kneeled by my bed and just thank God that I was saved.
Willard Morton says he feels overwhelmed by enormous emotion. He says it will likely be several days before he sorts it all out.
I had this kind of immediate sense that I don't think my life will ever be the same.
Morton is himself a small plane pilot. His narrow escape has not made him fear planes in general, he says. He says he'll think twice before riding in a prop jet again. Jim Newman, WCCO Television News, Minneapolis.
Now, a final wrap-up from Don Shelby in Reno, Nevada. What's on the agenda? What might we expect from tomorrow? I know there's a news conference at 9. Is that right?
Yes, at that time, Dave, it appears that some little bits of information about what the investigators have found will be brought out. Plus, they believe they'll have a partial list of names. It will be a long day. A note of appreciation here. Before any of the network camera crews were here, before the 7-person unit from CCO was dispatched, before any of the Minneapolis crews from the other television stations were here, some of the best video, some of the best questions, some of the best information that we had to work with tonight came from 2 individuals out of WCCO-TV who were mustered into service. They're sports reporters, cameraman Al Crocker and reporter Dennis Dragg. They were at the Super Bowl, and they were mustered into service, called over here to Reno, and they were hard at work before anyone else was here, and they had the dirty duty of going in and pulling out that tough information before anyone else was on the scene. They made our jobs easier to report. We'll bring you that partial list if the NTSB brings that list out tomorrow. We'll be keeping track of all of those developments. We'll be updating the condition of the 3 Twin Cities survivors situated at various hospitals around the Las Vegas and Reno area. And as we promised, and as it has been promised to us, it will be a long day for everyone concerned. The FBI identification team, the National Transportation Safety Bureau, for we reporters, for the survivors, for the individual family members who have come to identify the victims, for those people who just feel the pain back in Minnesota and the sense of loss that we all feel right now. It'll be a long day, but we'll be here to go through with it and report back what we can find.
Very good. Thank you. Good work.
Thank you.
Thus, we bring to a close this special report. Over the next few days, as Don has pointed out, more facts will become clear. What we're left with tonight is the raw, sheer emotion of the moment voiced by those who are touched by the death of Flight 203.
Oh, he'll be, I know that door's going to open and Louis is going to just come in with all his suitcases and everything. I just know he's going to.
I know I'm going to miss him, and he's got a lot of friends here in the Twin Cities that will also miss him. He was all-around great guy.
It's very difficult to describe, and there are so many emotions involved that it's hard to sort this out. And I think, too, that the real impact won't hit me really maybe for a number of days.
I got 2 widows and a mother I'm trying to take care of right now. We have sons and daughters and families here that have been killed. Let's get somebody from the Airlines or FAA helping these people.
I was so happy just to hear his voice and that he was all right. And I want to see how he's doing. And I'm really worried about him, how he's going to take this.
It just proves very firmly in my mind that there's a higher power.
For our colleague, Don Shelby, I'm Dave Moore.
I'm Pat Miles. Good night, everyone.